everyone, I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and all around the world. Check out these screens behind me. This is what's happening across the country, being covered by our stations and affiliates. It's happening out there. We're going to bring it to you live right now. And the first thing on our list, the Gulf Coast on alert. Helene is expected to grow into a powerful hurricane aiming to hit the Florida Panhandle. We have team coverage on the ground. And also happening now, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy makes his case to the world as he addresses the United Nations. Let's dip in to listen to President Zelenskyy.
Truce instead of real peace, but the only prizes Putin will give you in return are more suffering and disasters. We must restore nuclear safety. Energy must stop being used as a weapon. We must ensure food security. We need to bring home all our captured soldiers and civilians forcibly deported to Russia. We must uphold the UN Charter and guarantee our right, Ukraine's right to territorial integrity and sovereignty, just as we do for any other nation. We need to withdraw the Russian occupiers, which will bring an end to the hostilities in Ukraine, and we must hold those responsible for war crimes accountable. We need to prevent ecocide and stop the destruction of nature caused by the war. And we must not allow a second or third phase of this Russian invasion. And we need to make it clear the war is over. This is the peace formula. What part of this could be unacceptable to anyone who upholds the UN Charter? If someone in the world seeks alternatives to any of these points or tries to ignore any of them, it likely means they themselves want to do a part of what Putin is doing. The point they ignore reveals the desire they're hiding. And when the Chinese-Brazilian duo tries to grow into a choir of voices, with someone in Europe, with someone in Africa saying something alternative to a full and just peace, the question arises, what is the true interest? Everyone must understand you will not boost your power at Ukraine's expense. And the world has already been through colonial wars and conspiracies of great powers and the expense of those who are smaller. Every country, including China, Brazil, European nations, African nations, Middle East, all understand why this must remain in the past. And Ukrainians will never accept why anyone in the world believes that such a brutal colonial past, which suits no one today, can be imposed on Ukraine now instead of a normal, peaceful life. I want peace for my people, real peace and just peace. And I'm asking for your support from all nations of the world. We do not divide the world. I ask the same of you.
All right, folks, you've been listening to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy right now at the United Nations delivering an address to the UN General Assembly. We're going to continue to listen in on what President Zelenskyy is saying and what the reaction will be from those world leaders. But let's bring in CBS News reporter Olivia Gazis, who's at the United Nations this morning for us. And so, Olivia, we already knew sort of the broad strokes of what President Zelenskyy wanted to say, the message that he wanted to deliver to all of those world leaders that are sitting there, including, we should point out, the Russians. What stood out to you?
Absolutely. Well, Vlad, as you know, the entire Ukrainian delegation here has been doing its level best to keep Ukraine at the top of the agenda, especially as these urgent developments in the Middle East have threatened to dominate it. So this is President Zelenskyy making a push, as you heard there, to maintain global support for his country, especially as his forces are embarking on the what is expected to be a brutal fall fighting season, making sure that he has the political political support, that military support continues to come in. And he's already had a mostly favorable reception. The chamber was quiet just then, but yesterday, as he addressed the UN Security Council, there were more than a dozen states gathered around the table. And apart from, as you might expect, China and Russia, all of them condemned Russian aggression against Ukraine, condemned the exceedingly high civilian toll that is resulting from this conflict. And so he has been well received. After today, as we know, President Zelenskyy will continue to make a personal case. He's expected to meet with President Biden and Vice President Harris in Washington to lay out his vision for the way forward from here.
The question, of course, Olivia, has to be, even with this meeting on the books with President Biden, the members of Congress who are not necessarily supportive of the millions, the billions of dollars that the United States has sent to Ukraine in its defense of its borders and its country. Has President Zelenskyy at all mentioned that? I mean, it's got to be tricky navigating these waters, especially since we're just a month and a half away from an election. And of course, if former President Donald Trump wins that election, he's been sort of vocal about his desire to focus more on spending money in the United States. In other words, for the U.S. domestic policy, as opposed to sending money abroad.
Absolutely, and I think President Zelenskyy has acknowledged that the stakes are exceedingly high for his country at this moment, and that's why he is personally taking this plan on the road. He has termed it his victory plan, and that's what he's expected to present to President Biden and Vice President Harris tomorrow. He has also been trying to get in front of President Trump. No meeting, as far as we are aware, confirmed between the two of them, because he recognizes that no matter what happens in the election, Ukraine is going to continue to have very significant needs from the West, which has been in large part driven by this administration, by the U.S. over the almost 3 years of this conflict. A senior State Department official said that the details of this victory plan won't be known until it's laid out before the president, but they include three broad elements. One, the military needs on the battlefield. Two, the political needs of the population of Ukraine to be welcomed into the West. And three, the long-term economic needs that it will need to rebuild.
All right, Olivia Gazis at the UN for us this morning. Olivia, thank you as always for your reporting and your really excellent analysis. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right, our other big story, the weather in parts of the southeast. Folks are preparing for the impacts of Tropical Storm Helene. Fast-moving storm is growing in the Gulf of Mexico. It is on track to become a hurricane. Take a look at these images. Business and homeowners along the Florida Panhandle are bracing for flooding, power outages, and wind damage. And it is just another blow after a storm hit the region just about 2 weeks ago. CBS News national correspondent Tom Hansen is tracking all the developments in Florida this morning for us. So, Tom, just take us through what residents and folks are telling you, what officials are telling you, and how they're preparing for this storm.
Yeah, Vlad, well, as we've seen driving down to Ocklackney Bay, which is where we are right now, it is pretty much a ghost town. People are taking this storm very seriously. I want you to have a look behind me. You can see we're standing on a dock right now. Virtually every single boat has been removed from the dock. Take a look over here. You can see it's just empty dock after empty dock. People are taking this storm seriously. Over my shoulder here, this is Highway 98, one of the main emergency exit routes, and our crew, which has been driving up and down that bridge. They say that traffic has been light, if there's any traffic at all. Now, I want you to follow along with me and have a look over here. You can see that there are homes that have been boarded up. That is one of the things that we have been seeing consistently. And then one of the main concerns here, Vlad, is the storm surge, which is expected to pack a serious punch, 10 to 15 feet. Now, I want to give you some context here. I'm standing next to a palm tree. I'm 6 feet tall. 10 feet is roughly where the fronds begin, those husks right there. That's how high the water could get. And of course, this storm is massive. It is so big. And the bigger that a storm is, the more potential there is for that powerful storm surge to get even higher and to push in on these coastal communities. So for now, people are taking this seriously. They are getting out, they're heeding those warnings. And now it's just wait and see what damage is in store for this community, Vlad.
Hansen reporting for us. Tom, stay safe out there. Hoping the residents of the community are also safe as the storm approaches. We appreciate you. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a look at the storm track. Grant.
Hey, Vlad, so here's the deal. I mean, this is still a tropical storm, but I don't want to say only a tropical storm because we're on the cusp of it really beginning to rapidly intensify, where it's going to go from, well, a hurricane probably in about an hour or so to then a major hurricane as we go through the next couple of days. Look here, almost the entire state of Florida underneath tropical storm warnings or hurricane warnings. Those hurricane warnings, in fact, extend all the way into southern Georgia this morning, and that's out ahead of those rain bands that are already beginning to arrive. There's the center of Helene. It's just off the coast of Cancun right now. Again, tropical storm, but wind speeds are at 70 miles per hour. Once we get those wind speeds to 74, it is officially a hurricane. Again, I expect that from the 11 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. There's that rapid intensification up to 120 mile per hour winds by tomorrow midday as it races towards the Big Bend area, but the impacts are going to be well beyond that cone. Even though the center of the storm does go up into portions of the Mississippi Valley, the rainfall potential is going to be huge. In addition to the surge and the wind potential. This is right around 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. The center of the storm just off of Tampa Bay, pushing all that water up into the bay, but more so up into the Big Bend area. And then the flooding threat really arrives, especially across portions of western North Carolina. Vlad, we'll talk about this more in a bit. But some of the heaviest rainfall, the biggest flooding potential, is going to be well removed from the Gulf of Mexico into portions of the southern Appalachians. More on that in just a bit.
All right. Thank you very much, Grant. We'll check in with you a little bit later. Appreciate it. Okay, this morning, fears of an all-out war in the Middle East are ramping up as cross-border strikes continue between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel's military says it is going to activate reservist troops to the northern border as the conflict intensifies. Now, this move comes after Hezbollah, the militant group in Lebanon, fired a missile at Tel Aviv in its deepest strike yet into Israel. This after Israel launched strikes on dozens of Hezbollah targets this morning. Our Chris Livesay is following the very latest from northern Israel and files this report.
Well, in a major escalation, Hezbollah has fired a missile toward the Tel Aviv area for the very first time. The Israeli military successfully intercepted it, and there are no reports of injuries or significant damage. Israel responded with airstrikes of its own on Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, after a week of strikes that have killed hundreds and wounded thousands, according to Lebanese health officials. Hezbollah said the attack was in response to a week of all-out calamity for the Iran-backed group. First, it was those exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. Then it was the killing of a top commander in southern Beirut. And now it's airstrikes, Israel says, are targeting their weapons stockpiles. Some, they claim, are hidden inside civilians' homes. Hezbollah says this missile was aimed directly at the headquarters of Mossad, the Israeli Foreign Intelligence Agency. Remember, Hezbollah has missile capabilities that far surpass those of Hamas in Gaza. It's one reason Hezbollah is a much stronger enemy and why the U.S. is pressing hard for a diplomatic solution to prevent a full-blown war and hostilities possibly spiraling out of control. Vlad?
All right, Chris Livesay for us this morning. Thank you, Chris. It's the economy, stupid. Remember that old saying? Well, it's a top issue for voters in 2024, and it is front and center this week for both campaigns. We're going to talk about their policy proposals when it comes to the economy next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, folks, we are tracking Helene as the storm moves along the Gulf Coast and heads towards the southeast. It's expected to gain strength as it barrels toward Florida. For more on the storm and how climate change is impacting hurricanes, let's bring in CBS meteorologist Marina Jurica. Marina, experts expect that this storm is going to make landfall as a Category 3. Explain to our viewers what goes into a hurricane's intensity and how climate change is potentially impacting that.
Well, thanks, Vlad. The increasing intensity of hurricanes is basically rooted in physics. It's the physics of our entire climate system. So hurricanes draw energy from that warm ocean water. And as that climate change causes sea surface temperatures to rise, the energy available for these storms increases. In fact, we estimate that the world's oceans have absorbed over 90% of the excessive heat that's caused by greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this added heat is fuel for hurricanes, making them more powerful. Studies show that for every 1.8 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase in sea surface temperature, the intensity of hurricanes can increase by about 7%. So warmer water leads to stronger winds and more moisture in the atmosphere, which means heavier rainfall during storms. One of the most significant effects of climate change is its impact on hurricane intensity. Warmer air can hold more water vapor, about 7% more for every degree Celsius of warming. So that additional moisture translates into heavier rainfall, which is why we're seeing more catastrophic flooding associated with all of these recent storms. Now, this week, scientists examined the temperatures in the North Caribbean and eastern Gulf of Mexico and found that they were 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit higher than normal. And human-caused climate change made these temperatures 200 times more likely. This is creating that fuel for the storm, Vlad.
Science and data. What a wonderful thing, Marina. So let's talk about this extra fuel that is coming from warmer oceans. How does that extra fuel translate into a storm's stronger destructive power? Because that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. There's more intensity and the level of the storms is rising.
Precisely. So these stronger storms are becoming more destructive due to rising sea levels. So global sea levels have risen approximately 8 to 9 inches since 1880, with about a third of that rise occurring just in the last 25 years. So higher sea levels increase storm surges, the wall of water that hurricanes push onto shore, making coastal flooding more severe. Another factor tied to climate change is the slowing of hurricanes. Research indicates that over the past several decades, storms are moving slower, which means they spend more time over land, dumping more rain and causing prolonged damage. This is linked to changes in the atmospheric circulation patterns driven by a warming Arctic. You have a warming Arctic, which is altering the jet streams that steer all of the weather systems across the globe. And one of the more troubling trends that we are observing is how some hurricanes are stalling or just completely slowing down. For example, Hurricane Harvey in 2017 dumped over 60 inches of rain in parts of Texas because it just lingered over the area for days. So slower moving storms can be particularly devastating because they prolong the impacts of heavy rain, wind, and flooding. Now, tropical cyclones can cost billions of dollars. In fact, since 1980, they have caused more than 1.4 trillion in damages and caused nearly 7,000 deaths. Now, with Helene, Vlad, we're not as concerned about it stalling out, but we are concerned about its very rapid approach to the Florida coastline and the impacts that it will have because of that.
Wow, Marina, I got to say, in all the years I've been doing this is the most interesting weather analysis and report I've ever seen. My eyes, I was glued to everything that you were saying. Really, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
That was excellent. Appreciate it. All right, let's talk about the economy, which is front and center on the campaign trail with both Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump trying to shore up as many battleground votes as they can. So joining me now with the very latest on all of that is CBS News campaign reporters Libby Cathy and senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Okay, Ed, let me begin with you. The Vice President, as you know, is expected to ramp up her economic message today in a speech in Pittsburgh. She's also doing a couple of she's doing one one-on-one interview with our competitor at NBC News. What can we expect to hear from her? And will that be enough to quiet some of the murmurs that we've heard that her economic policy doesn't seem to address the needs of what people say is most important to them?
Well, it's not even whether it addresses it, it's what is it exactly. That's what voters keep asking for, is more information. And so, yes, her campaign feels that after today, they should have laid out enough, or at least more detail, such that when they get asked the question, you know, who do you better trust in the economy, or what do you know about their plans, the numbers will at least tighten and perhaps begin to favor Donald Trump a little less. He still leads on the issue of who's better equipped to deal with the economy. Same on immigration, which is an issue she's going to be dealing with on Friday. More on that later. But we know in this case, it's expected to be a pretty detailed plan, several pages worth of information on what exactly she would do. All of it designed to dispel the notion, as Donald Trump puts it, that she's a communist or a socialist or a left coast liberal, and to sort of try to draw on her experience as Attorney General and as a senator to point out the fact that in many cases she was trying to seek public-private partnerships. She understands that it's the market that's got to drive how the economy grows, and she's going to argue she's not wedded to ideology. That is a signal, A, criticized the Project 2025 program that's been embraced by some on the right, that the former president dissuades, even though many people who worked for him helped write it, but also to say to skeptics, I'm not beholden to the left wing of my party, that if there are things that make more sense to do that may sit more towards the middle or even to the right, and it helps the economy and it creates jobs and it helps boost American manufacturing, I'm all for it.
All right, so that is happening a little bit later today. Libby, let me ask you about former President Trump, who gave a speech in Savannah where he shared his idea for what he calls a manufacturing renaissance that he says would bring millions of jobs back to the United States from overseas. Walk us through what he said to those supporters.
Yeah, good morning, Vlad. So we heard the former president in Savannah yesterday, as you mentioned, lay out his economic policies, as we're seeing Vice President Kamala Harris do today in Pittsburgh, kind of preemptively striking her, if you will. And the main message from all of his economic policies, the big highlight, is that he incentivizes goods being made in America. That's the big phrase, made in America, that we hear over and over from the former president. So some of what he laid out yesterday was to incentivize companies that have moved away from America to come back. So setting up special zones on federal land where they could relocate to come back to the country. He says he wants to lower the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%, but only for those companies who make their goods in America. We talk about tariffs a lot on this show. That's former President Trump's solution for a lot of things. This week, for instance, he put John Deere on notice, saying if they continue with plans to move their manufacturing to Mexico, that they will face a 200% tariff on imports back into the United States. But he follows that with saying they wouldn't have to worry about those tariffs if they make their products in the United States. So that's what we hear over and over from the former president. We're here in Mint Hill, North Carolina today. He's speaking at a manufacturing facility, and we'll probably hear a reiteration of what we heard yesterday. And as Ed notes, probably some of that name calling on Kamala Harris, calling her a socialist, a communist. But it's all about the economy, with that as a top issue for voters, Vlad.
Yeah, I wish somebody would just someday post the actual definition of what a communist or a socialist is for people to understand that they're. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Ed, Libby, love you guys. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, as a reminder, CBS News will host the only vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz on Tuesday in New York. Join us for live coverage of the debate, moderated by our Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. That will start at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and at 8 p.m. on CBS. Meanwhile, for us, still ahead, a suspect hijacked a bus in Los Angeles. One person is said to be dead. What we know about the incident and how it unfolded. That's coming up next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we are following. Sean Diddy Combs is facing a new lawsuit this morning. Another woman came forward accusing the rap mogul of rape. Thalia Graves says Combs and his head of security drugged and raped her back in 2001 and recorded it on video. Combs has not responded to the new lawsuit. He's currently behind bars in New York City without bail on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. He's pleaded not guilty and is vowing to fight to clear his name. A chemical leak has forced evacuations in an Ohio town outside of Cincinnati. A pressure release valve on a rail car began leaking the toxic inflammable chemical called styrene yesterday near Cleves, Ohio. The chemical is typically used to make plastic. People within a half mile were told to leave immediately. Several school buildings were evacuated. Officials were concerned about the possibility that the leak could trigger an explosion. Police in Los Angeles say the suspect that hijacked a bus this morning shot and killed a passenger. The suspect reportedly pulled out a gun during a dispute with the bus driver, and at least 2 other passengers were on board. The chase lasted an hour. Police say armored vehicles responded, surrounded the bus, and had a standoff with the suspect, who was eventually taken into custody. We're still awaiting information about the person who was killed. Okay, Tropical Storm Helene is on track to become one of the biggest storms of the year. It's expected to grow into a hurricane by the time it hits Florida tomorrow. Dozens of emergency crews are being deployed to help manage the impact. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez is in Crystal River, Florida, and joins me now to talk about what residents are preparing for. So, Nicole, are people listening to those evacuation warnings?
It certainly looks that way, Vlad, and thank goodness for that. If the forecast pans out, we're talking all the water you see here being pushed onto shore within a matter of minutes, flooding anything in its path, towering over maybe even that marina behind us. In fact, just moments ago, an alert coming through our phones warning those of catastrophic storm surge, asking everyone to get out now. Thousands of people here now under that evacuation order that extends to about a dozen counties here, as really a majority of Florida's Big Bend now braces for the potential impacts here. For some context, Vlad, only 6 counties in the entire state are not under that emergency declaration.
So you'll remember that Category 4 hurricane, Idalia, that slammed the area more than a year ago. And have residents told you about their memories of that and how they are preparing for this hurricane, given their experience 4 years ago?
Yes, in fact, we saw several feet of storm surge in the downtown area of Crystal River, where we're standing now. A lot of this was once underwater just about a year ago. So they're really using that as sort of an example, fueling of their plans this time around. We know the city is not only providing sandbags, but once again, really encouraging those in this evacuation zone to get out and telling them you really only have a matter of hours until you start to feel the impacts as the storm inches closer to landfall. So really, time is of the essence. They're asking everyone to get out by 2 p.m. So we've only got a couple hours left for that.
All right, Nicole, appreciate you. Thank you very much. Let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Grant.
Vlad, so many things to consider with this, what is now a tropical storm, but will eventually be a hurricane, and that's going to be the calling card with this. Is actually a fairly significant hurricane, not just in terms of its winds, its surge, and its rainfall, but its size. So not only is it gathering strength this morning, but it's also gathering size. Have a look here. And I've draped the clouds over the map here so you can really tell how massive that cloud band and that cloud field is as it moves out of the northwestern Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. At some point, the entire southeast will not only be under the canopy of Helene, but also a good portion of the state of Florida is going to be underneath tropical storm force winds. Walk over here with me. Let me show you where Helene is right now. Again, it's moving out of the northwestern Caribbean, but it's such a large tropical storm at this point, and it's going to grow even larger. Wind speeds are currently at 70 miles per hour. You need 74 mile per hour winds for it to be a hurricane. It will go from a 70 mile per hour tropical storm to a 120 mile per hour Category 3 major hurricane by Thursday, probably late morning into early tomorrow afternoon. Now, notice the cone of uncertainty is relatively small. That's a little bit of a false sense of security because the impacts are going to extend well beyond that cone. Again, that's just the cone of where the center may track. The center of the storm, though, is going to be going up into the Midwestern states, which is going to bring a whole nother threat from the surge to the wind, but also that heavy rainfall. I mentioned the entire state of Florida underneath tropical storm force winds. That could happen by tomorrow afternoon with those strong hurricane force winds very close to the center. But as the center of the storm makes landfall Thursday night and Friday morning, that's when we're going to get into the worst of the surge. I mentioned the rainfall. Look at all that heavy rainfall right near the northeastern part of Helene as it races towards the Big Bend area. It'll then rain out all that rainfall across portions of the Tennessee Valley up into the Appalachians. And that's why even places like western North Carolina could see significant impacts from the heavy rainfall and the flooding that could even result in some landslides. Surge, a huge concern immediately along the Gulf Coast of Florida up into the Big Bend region, where some places could see 10 to 15 feet of water pushed up onto usually dry ground. And then you've got the inland flooding, Vlad. Some places up into North Carolina, not only landslides, but we could see over a foot of rainfall through Saturday morning. Back to you.
All right, my friend, we'll check in with you a little bit later. Thanks so much. A Senate report reveals more about the security failures that led to the attempted assassination of former President Trump in Pennsylvania. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins me now with the very latest on those findings. So, Scott, what did you learn from that report?
Breakdowns, Vlad, communication, training, even some of the equipment. According to this new Senate report, the Secret Service had faulty radios with them on the ground that day. What's more, they say some of the equipment they were supposed to deploy to prevent drones wasn't flown because they had an inexperienced counter-drone operator. That a counter sniper, though aware of a potential risk on that roof, told the Senate investigators it didn't cross his mind to urge Trump to get off the stage. But what you have here, Vlad, is just this series of warning signs missed. Red flags missed. And according to the Senate investigation, this is impactful, they found that the Secret Service witnesses, the employees who they questioned, didn't take accountability, or pointing fingers, or slow walking this review. This is a pretty damning report about Butler, Pennsylvania. And Vlad, this is an investigation that is going to grow. They have more questions about Butler, and now they have this incident in Palm Beach, Florida, from September 14th, another potential attempted assassination.
Yeah, all of this, Scott, has really sort of shattered the myth of the Secret Service. And I want to sort of get your sense of what's next in this investigation following this report. And is the Secret Service expecting any more repercussions?
The Secret Service, in a statement to CBS News, says their own internal review aligns with some of what this U.S. Senate report found, and that they've been cooperative with investigators, and that they now have the highest level of security around candidate Donald Trump, nominee Donald Trump. The Senate investigation will continue. There's a U.S. House task force investigating the Secret Service failures. The Secret Service will continue its own internal review. They've not released a comprehensive report yet. And oh, by the way, the FBI is investigating Butler, Pennsylvania. So you have all these investigations underway. But there's a more fundamental bottom line for the agency here today, Vlad. The U.S. House and Senate both expected to pass a spending bill to keep the government open through December 20th, but they have tucked in some special language for the Secret Service. $230 million more to help them with their protective mission, improve their protective capacity, and they've also required the Secret Service hand over more paperwork, more records of what happened on and before July 13th. That means their investigations continue.
Wow. All right. Scott McFarland for us on Capitol Hill. Scott, thanks so much. Sorry messing up your name there. It's hump day. You know how it goes. Love you, brother. Talk to you soon. All right. The United States has sent more resources into the Middle East as the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah intensifies, and it has intensified over the last few hours. A rocket out of Lebanon, folks, was able to reach Tel Aviv, and the IDF responded with a new barrage of attacks hitting dozens of targets. So joining us live from the Pentagon for more on this is CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, we're learning about the only oil replenishment ship serving the U.S.'s strike group in the Middle East, which ran aground on Monday. What can you tell us about that and how it might impact the U.S. forces that are sent to the region?
Yeah, Vlad. So officials that I spoke to here yesterday after video surfaced on social media showing what looked to be the Bighorn flooding, I did confirm that this U.S. Navy ship, this oil replenishment ship, was damaged off the coast of Oman. It is being towed, or has been towed, with the help of private tugboats into port. What's critical to understand here is that we understand that most of that oil replenishment had already been done to the Abe Lincoln carrier strike group, and that is important. Now, the Abe Lincoln itself, this is the largest projection of power that the U.S. has in that region, and with good reason, is nuclear powered. However, it has a whole flotilla of escorts, destroyers, and other ships that are reliant on those fossil fuels. So hopefully that fueling had already taken place. There are obviously aircraft that are dependent on that as well. Now, as you mentioned, this is the sole oil replenisher in that strike carrier group. So what we don't know yet is, and they won't tell us, is what they're going to do, because this is going to be a prolonged deployment there. There's no question that they're going to be taken home soon. What they're going to do in the future, it's been described as an inconvenience, but not critical at this point. Need to mention, nobody was injured in whatever happened to the ship if it ran aground, and there's no sign of any oil leakage.
That is good news. But meanwhile, as you know, Charlie, fighting between Israel and Hezbollah is intensifying today. I mean, I think a lot of people, you heard the president of the United States yesterday in that speech to the UN General Assembly saying that no one wants to see an all-out war. Is there anything that is standing in the way of that? In other words, any kind of diplomatic endeavors that are being considered to prevent that happening?
Well, sadly, Vlad, I think we have to be honest. The two things that are standing in the way of that are Hezbollah and Israel. There's no appetite for either side of this to stop the conflict at the moment. Here, even at the Pentagon, they're talking about trying to find a diplomatic solution. Obviously, that's coming out of state. It's coming out of President Biden. It's coming out of the White House. But there are two good reasons that this continues to go on. In terms of Israel, they want to continue to push Hezbollah back so they can that group can no longer strike areas in the north. But that is a big ask. Is it more than 100,000 missiles, long-range missiles, some guided missiles that Hezbollah still has the capacity to fire? As far as Hezbollah is concerned and Iran as its backing, what originally started is joining this battle in order to stop the Israelis or in support of the Palestinians, Hamas in Gaza, has now accelerated to a conflict on its own. So what we've seen is the Israelis putting more resources into that northern area, Hezbollah firing back, as you mentioned. Now they're going as far as Tel Aviv. They have plenty of capability to reach there and even further. So this is where the escalation is taking place, despite everybody from the outside looking for a diplomatic solution.
All right, Charlie Daggett reporting from the Pentagon for us this morning. Charlie, thank you, friend. Coming up, why does there seem to be such a disconnect between how Americans view climate change and the actions their elected officials take on that issue? We're going to explore those questions next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Yesterday, President Biden spent much of his address to the UN General Assembly talking about the threat of climate change. And later in the day, he spoke to world leaders at a separate gathering for Climate Week, where he touted his role in making more than $400 billion available to help spark a green energy transition in the United States. But in the U.S., there's often a disconnect between the concern and urgency Americans feel about climate change versus how their elected officials act on the issue. Let's bring in CBS News Sacramento investigative correspondent Julie Watts to break this all down for us. So Julie, you would think that if there's a state where elected officials and the public are aligned on climate change, it would be California. But there are cases where lawmakers vote against clean energy and climate legislation, including some Democrats, which is surprising to a lot of people. Why is that?
Yeah, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a California lawmaker who identified as a climate denier, right? That's not what we're looking at here. In fact, California is a leader in clean energy and environmental legislation. The things they're debating in D.C., like cap and trade, have long been law here. In contrast, the things that they are debating in California's State House are sometimes novel or untested policies, right? And you said it earlier, Vlad, it's the economy, stupid. A lot of folks are thinking about that right now, and they're worried about the unintended consequences of passing this legislation that may be untested. They point to things like gas prices in California, which are the highest in the nation, in part because of some of our environmental policies. And then you may not know this, but California is among the largest oil producers and refiners in the country, and that means there are a lot of oil and gas jobs here. And so that's a big factor for many of these lawmakers when they're voting. In fact, we tracked down a couple of lawmakers who are most often identified as sort of aligning with the oil industry, and we asked them specifically, tell us about your votes. Listen to what they said. How do you explain your vote on these bills?
Well, for me, I always look at the unintended consequences. Not every community can afford whatever policy we pass out here, not because they don't want to or they're climate deniers, it's because they just can't afford it.
What do you say to your constituents who support climate change legislation, who want to reduce CO2 levels, and who see that you vote against these bills that have been billed as climate change reducers?
I'd say I'm on the same page as they are. I want to reduce carbon emissions. I am a believer of climate change, but we as legislators have to look at issues from all sides. We have to think about what's going to, keep our economy going, what's going to keep people employed, rising fuel costs. I think that right now people are really having a hard time with, making sure they can make ends meet, and I think they're struggling.
So you can see the economy is certainly a big issue for some of these lawmakers. At least that's what they say when they're voting against some of this legislation.
The other thing your investigation found, though, which I think is really interesting, is Democrats who are accepting oil money from oil companies. How does that impact their votes?
Yeah, that was a fun one. So we looked at 6,000 bill positions on over 100 votes that were related to oil and gas. And then we looked at all the money that our California lawmakers got from oil and gas this year. We found Democrats as a whole got more money from the oil and gas industry than Republicans in California. That's not the case in Congress. That's unique to California, in part because we have so many Democrats in our state house, right? We're a Democratic supermajority. But when we analyzed how that money impacted the vote, we found that there wasn't really a correlation. Some folks who got a lot of money voted against oil and gas, in some cases 100% of the time, and vice versa. Instead, what we found was a strong connection with labor. Now, it's no secret that the labor lobby is very strong in California State House. They carry a lot of power there. And, oil means jobs. There are studies that show that fossil fuel jobs in California actually pay more and have better benefits than clean energy jobs. That's not the case in other states. That is the case here. So when labor combined with or backed big oil on a bill, that's when we saw lawmakers most often supported bills in favor of big oil.
Fascinating reporting. Julie, thank you very much for sharing it with us. We appreciate it. All right, coming up, we are tracking the very latest, the path of Helene as the powerful storm gains strength and barrels towards the state of Florida. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We want to show you some live pictures out of Memphis, Tennessee. There on the screen, you see Attorney Ben Crump and the family of Tyre Nichols. They are holding a vigil outside the courthouse where the federal trial related to Tyre Nichols' death is set to resume. The trial is in its third week. 3 former police officers from Memphis were charged in Nichols' beating death following a traffic stop. And they were charged with also violating Tyre Nichols' federal civil rights. So we're going to keep an eye on what is happening there in Memphis, Tennessee. Attorney Crump always speaks for quite a number of minutes, but if he says something that is relevant and pertinent to what is happening there, we're going to bring it to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. Meanwhile, one last look at the national weather. Let's bring in Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. Grant.
Hey, Vlad. So, yeah, all eyes on the northwestern Caribbean now as Helene starts to move into the southern Gulf of Mexico. We are anticipating the 11 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center. They've had several planes flying in, above, ahead of this hurricane, not only to get the latest information about how strong those winds are, but then to take more data, put it into the forecast model so we can get the most accurate forecast as this storm really begins to race and rapidly intensify as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, wind speeds are at 70 miles per hour. We just need 4 more miles per hour for it to officially become a hurricane. That's the latest forecast. That's the 5 o'clock forecast cone. We will get a new forecast cone with that 11 o'clock advisory you see there at the upper right-hand corner, still the 8 o'clock advisory. But still, between now and tomorrow midday, it's expected to go from a tropical storm to a Category 3 hurricane just off the coast of Tampa Bay. It'll then race up toward the Big Bend region, where we're looking at significant and potentially catastrophic impacts from surge, the wind, and then the heavy rainfall as it moves up into the Appalachians. Just look at this wide swath of impacts, from moderate impacts from Miami all the way into the mid-Mississippi Valley. Places like Missouri are going to see impacts from this, but the greatest impacts are going to be right along landfall and even up into the Appalachians, where up to a foot of rain is going to be possible, with landslides potentially causing issues all the way into the weekend. So rain is going to be a big concern, in addition to the surge threat up along the Florida coast all the way into the southeast. Meanwhile, back west, we got to show you the whole country here. Cooler, more seasonable conditions back into the southern plains, very warm conditions up into the northern tier states. And that threat for rainfall from Helene is going to continue all the way to the northeast as we head to the second half of the week into the weekend. Vlad, back to you, sir.
All right, Grant. Thanks, brother. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Folks, an encore of CBS Mornings is next. This is CBS News 24/7.